Oh, Clarence. Oh, Clarence. Oh, Clarence.
An election on the Canadian prairie, one that may decide whether we all have state medical care. Newsmagazine, the Sunday television news program of the CBC. Host this week is Norman DePoe.
Good evening. Next Wednesday, some 600,000 voters in Saskatchewan are eligible to go to the polls, and this is something more than a routine provincial election. For the first time since 1944, members of Canada's only socialist government will admit privately that they have a fight on their hands. If they do go down, and they won't admit that even privately, they may have already won on their major issue. Two of the parties opposing them say that whether the CCF wins or loses, the people of Saskatchewan will somehow or other get a state plan of medical care. It'll be the first in North America, and it's being fought bitterly. It was Saskatchewan, of course, that started a hospital plan in 1947, something we've all accepted since. Now, what Premier T.C. Douglas calls the next step is being fought out in a confusing debate involving 4 political parties but 5 campaigns, because the Saskatchewan College of Physicians and Surgeons is knee-deep in this fight, too. Formally at stake, of course, are the 55 seats in the Saskatchewan legislature. 54 of them on the block next Wednesday, the vote in one northern riding deferred. The House that has just dissolved had 36 CCF members, 14 Liberals, 3 social creditors. The Conservatives, traditionally weak in the province, are staging an all-out fight to do something they haven't managed for 30 years, elect at least one member to the provincial House. This looked like a good year on the prairie. Most of the seeding is done, and the young wheat is already covering the dark soil with a deepening green. But there's still plenty of work to do, and some of the farmers who control the destiny of this province haven't had much time to go to meetings. It's the votes of men like these that will decide 44 of the 54 seats at stake, and none of the scores of newsmen who have poured into Saskatchewan are so rash as to predict how these men will cast them. And here is the first confusing factor. All 4 parties have put up full slates, 216 men and women fighting for these 55 seats. Last time, in 1956, the CCF got 43% of the popular vote. The Liberals, 32. Social credit astonished many people with 118,000 votes, 22% of the total, and the Conservatives, who ran only 9 candidates, got less than 2%. Well, in 1960, the analysts and the dopesters are walking rather warily around this 4-way fight. You can see pockets of strength for every party. Conservatives will tell you their best chances in the cities. The 4-seat Regina battle, the 3 members to be elected in Saskatoon. Historically, the province has had only one Conservative premier, and he held office with the support of independent members. After the 1958 federal sweep, when only one CCF member survived the Diefenbaker tide, the provincial party got back on its feet. In this election, 15 federal MPs, headed by Northern Affairs Minister Alvin Hamilton, have been working hard for the Progressive Conservatives. Their provincial leader is Martin Peterson. He's 38 years old, a farmer. He doesn't agree that the main issue in this election is medical care. As he sees it, there can be no prosperity in Saskatchewan without farm prosperity. And it's time, he thinks, for the provincial government to do something about that itself. Mr. Peterson has promised provincial payments of $1 an acre to wheat farmers and other farmers with a maximum of $100. At his final rally in Regina, he went a little bit farther than that.
We believe that the provincial government and the people of Saskatchewan must be prepared to make a maximum amount of help, a maximum effort, help themselves in dealing with our agricultural problems before we look to the rest of Canada for support and assistance in time of distress and need. Second, we have made this pledge because we recognize that there is a cash deficiency in certain classes of Saskatchewan farmers, and because the principle of acreage payment is designed primarily to help rather than to discriminate against these farmers. And I and my candidates from all across the province find that acreage payments are not only acceptable, but that they are desired urgently and immediately by the majority of our farmers, particularly our smaller farmers. After talking to the federal members of Parliament from Saskatchewan, I find that they are unanimous with us that acreage payments are the fairest and the most equitable way in which governments can come to the direct assistance of our farmers at this time of need, and that this type of payment is the wish of the great majority of farmers in this province. Furthermore, it is now abundantly clear that the need for direct cash assistance in the form of acreage payments is urgent, particularly urgent for those small farmers who harvested little or no crop last fall. Bearing in mind that the Prime Minister on the 4th of March this year, 1960, in making his announcement in the House of Commons on the rejection of deficiency payments, stated that the federal government, and I quote, recognize that certain farmers in Western Canada require assistance. I have been the only provincial leader in this province who has stood firm, held firm, recommended to the federal government strongest possible representations that I could make, that acreage payments be made by the federal government as soon as it is administratively possible. And I wish to announce to you this evening that I am in a position to say that I have good reason. Indeed, I think I can go as far as to say that I have strong reason to believe that action can be expected shortly from the federal government on an acreage payment plan. I am sure that this announcement will come as good news to the farmers of Saskatchewan. And I also believe that because farm leaders from Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba have in the last few days stated clearly and unequivocally for the first time that they support the principle of acreage payment and that they would favor an immediate cash payment. But they also, like the majority of farmers in Western Canada, will welcome this announcement.
Well, most people took Mr. Peterson's statement as a strong hint that he'd been in direct touch with the Prime Minister. And Liberal leader Ross Thatcher took it a little bit farther. While Mr. Peterson was speaking to some 350 to 400 people in Regina's Legion Hall, Mr. Thatcher was winding up his campaign before about 1,600 cheering supporters just 2 blocks away. Here's how he dealt with the Conservative announcement.
Now, I just had one of our officials from the office pass me a note. You know, Martin Peterson's got a meeting in town tonight. Instead of a couple of thousand people, I understand he's got 300 there, but that's typical. Martin made an announcement tonight. I wish to announce tonight, said Martin, that I am in a position to say that I have good reason to believe that action can be expected shortly from the federal government on an acreage payment. Well, now, folks, these story promises have been coming quite a while. But if Mr. Diefenbaker should be sincere with this province of a further acreage payment, coming as it does 3 days before an election, I say that this surely is an example of blatant political bribery of the first kind. The promise that he made 2 years ago hasn't been carried out. Now he's going to pay an acreage payment. I say that this payment was born out of desperation for his provincial candidate, because he knows he won't elect a single one of them.
And so one major issue, farm support. It's an odd feature of this election, though, that each of the party leaders has picked his own issue. Social credit, which moved into Saskatchewan strongly in 1956, is headed by Martin Kell. Like so many candidates in this election, he's young. In fact, the same age as Mr. Peterson, 38. He won his first election 22 years ago, as he recalled to me when I talked to him in his hotel room. This was a high school election, a high school vote, and Mr. Kell swept 41 of 45 votes with a speech on monetary reform. He's still dedicated to these basic principles of social credit. Many people in Saskatchewan see his party as the major threat to the CCF government. Certainly, he sees his party as a major threat himself. And he hasn't changed since he left high school. His basic principles are still monetary reform. Here's how he explained it at his meeting.
In order for men and women to choose and to choose wisely, they must have brought to them the program and the issues of which the political parties are basing their election campaign on. We have heard a lot of suggestion that the real issue in this election is the medical services. Some have referred to the main issue being the amalgamation of the merger of the CCF political movement with the CLC, the labor movement. I said on one of the interviews, one of the television stations, that the only reason some of those people are suggesting that those are the real political issues is for the reason that they haven't got an issue of their own to present. In any of the meetings that I've taken a part in, I've always found it difficult to have sufficient time to be able to give the people a complete outline of those things which we represent in the social credit movement. We feel satisfied that when those principles that our program is based upon is brought into a government policy, that they can bring to you those results which we have been looking for many years. And today, the opportunity for social credit in Saskatchewan is at its greatest. The situation, the economic situation, the various shortcomings of political parties, as I said before, some of the destructive and criticism offered by political leaders, is telling our people that there must be an answer other than what they've had so far. And I feel quite confident that today we are coming into our own, to the position to where you and I can accomplish those results that we've been fighting for the last 14, 15 years. The program for Saskatchewan, which we are presenting to the people of this province, is a program that is based, first of all, on the great development of this province. We maintain that there's only two sources of revenue today to our government. The two main sources is borrowing and taxation. And any one of those two sources or avenues taken to its extreme will destroy you from within. We believe that the extreme in borrowing, the extreme in a taxation policy, will be just as effective in the confiscation of property as government expropriation can be.
And so, two major issues, farm support, monetary and financial reform. Both could have national implications. The question that's being asked is, will the Conservatives, after their federal sweep 2 years ago, rebuild their popularity in this provincial election? Or will social credit continue its eastward march from its strongholds in British Columbia and Alberta? Many observers say no to both questions, but they don't say no very loudly or very certainly. They do agree, though, that the main fight is between the CCF and the Liberals. And here's where Mr. Thatcher's campaign comes in. Some people have detected an approach reminiscent of the late Premier of Ontario, Mitchell Hepburn. Others say no, Mr. Thatcher's his own man, unlike anyone else. But there is a personal battle here as well as a party one. When Mr. Thatcher left the CCF, he did so to join the Liberal Party, and that's remembered. He became a provincial issue in his own person when he challenged Mr. Douglas to a public debate, and that's an argument that's remembered too. Now he's staging an all-out campaign, stumping the province from end to end, and he's using every approach in the political book in his effort to drive the CCF from power. His final rally was one that packed a Regina dance hall. There are still arguments going on about whether his audience was larger than the one that Premier Douglas had the night before at the exhibition grounds. But Mr. Thatcher's hall was certainly full. And he had a special song. It was a calypso aimed at the retiring provincial treasurer, Clarence Farnes.
Oh, Clarence, take me money and run my soul. Please promise to
Mr. Thatcher had Miss Saskatchewan in his parade. And like the other party leaders, he's picked his own issue to fight the election on. Here's how he put it himself.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure most of the people of Saskatchewan today realize that we have an economic mess on our hands. Of course, the socialists don't want to talk about it. So in order to divert the attention of the people away from that economic mess, trying to pull something new out of the hat. And they're talking about state medicine. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I say tonight, as I've said repeatedly, we don't think that state medicine is the major issue in this campaign. Because ladies and gentlemen, whether the GCF are elected to power or the Liberals, the people of Saskatchewan can have a medical plan if they genuinely want it. Now, our approach is different, ladies and gentlemen. The socialists say we're going to have state medicine. The Liberals favor prepaid medical insurance. The socialists say, elect us, even with a 35% majority, and we'll ram a scheme down your throat. The Liberals say, elect us, we'll find out what the costs of these various schemes are, and then hold a plebiscite. But ladies and gentlemen, let no one say that the Liberal Party is not sincere in their pledge to bring in a scheme of prepaid medical insurance. If the people of Saskatchewan in a plebiscite say they want it, and that plebiscite will be held within 1 year of the election date of June 8th. So we say that that is not the major issue. I only want to talk about two issues tonight, and I'm going to sit down. What are the main issues in this campaign? Well, surely, folks, one of the issues in this campaign must be the way that Saskatchewan has lagged behind the rest of Canada these last 16 years in economic development. I don't care what your politics are. You go to Winnipeg or Brandon or Calgary or Edmonton, see the development in those cities, you can't help but come be shocked when you get back to Saskatchewan. Isn't there something wrong, ladies and gentlemen, with a province when 2/3 of our university graduates and collegiate graduates have to leave the province even to get a job? Right down in my home city of Moose Jaw, a few years ago, most of our CPR employees were CPS. Then the diesel program came along. A lot of them were laid off, almost 600 in the last few years. A lot of those folks are starting to realize that having good labor legislation doesn't mean very much. If you haven't got a job, that's the position a lot of people in Saskatchewan have.
For Mr. Thatcher, then, this is an anti-socialist battle. He's also suggested that if the people re-elect the CCF government, they may not know what kind of a government they will have if the proposed merger based on affiliation with the Canadian Labour Congress goes into effect. He has suggested that the Western farmer may find himself dominated by the Eastern trade unionist. On the medical care plan, the Conservatives propose a royal commission, perhaps a medical plan after that. Only Mr. Keln and Social Credit are openly against a government plan. Their view is that they would help people to join the two private insurance schemes now operating in Saskatchewan by refunding from the provincial treasury part of the premiums that people would have to pay. And this is the national issue in this campaign. It's being fought hotly not only by the parties, but by the physicians. Our Newsmagazine cameraman needed emergency medical attention last Thursday, and so we drove into Moose Jaw. He emerged from a doctor's office with some stitches and a neat dressing on his left hand, but he also came out with this. The fine print says that your personal doctor makes this pamphlet available to you in the public interest. The College of Physicians and Surgeons has a full-time public relations man hard at work since last April to wage what he describes as an information program. And it's one of the most controversial features in this controversial election. Some doctors have said publicly that they're less than happy with the way the campaign has been conducted. More will say so privately. But still, every doctor I've talked to is against state medicine. Many of them have accepted a voluntary assessment of $100 each, theoretically a total of $90,000 to fight Mr. Douglas's plan. There have been TV and radio speeches, advertisements in most newspapers, all aimed at the defeat not only of the CCF plan, but of any government plan. And Mr. Douglas has been fighting back. His final rally in Regina on Friday night. And here's how he dealt with the doctor's campaign at that rally.
And now we are saying that we're ready for the next step. And the next step is to set up a province-wide medical care program. Now, I don't expect that you can answer all the questions that people will throw at you. I ask you only to remember one simple fact, and that is that the medical care program will be exactly the same as the hospital insurance program. Work on the same basis. You'll pay a per capita tax, either monthly or quarterly, and you'll buy your medical care card, exactly as you buy your hospital card. And I'm hoping you'll pay the same amount of money for it. $17.50 a year if you're single, $35 a year if you're married. I want to be perfectly honest. The cost of living keeps on going up. We may have to make it $40 a year. But we'll keep it as low as we can so that nobody will be shut out. And when you get your medical care card, it will just be like your hospital card. It will entitle you to go to any doctor anywhere in the province, or if you're outside the province, to go to any doctor anywhere in the Western world. And the doctor will look after you just as he looks after you now. If you're very ill, he'll come to your house. If you're able, you'll go to his office. If he thinks it advisable, he'll put you in a hospital. There he'll treat you. If necessary, he'll operate on you. If he's not qualified to operate on you, he'll say to you, you need a surgeon or you need a specialist. And you will choose the surgeon and you will choose the specialist. Everything will be exactly the same as it is now, except one simple thing. That is that instead of the doctor sending the bill to you, he will send the bill to the medical care plan. Now, surely there's nothing very complicated about this. I've listened to the most amazing stories in recent weeks. I've a woman come to me with tears in her eyes and say, I've been to see my doctor, and he says if this government plan goes through, I won't be able to come and see him anymore. And when I asked him why, he said, well, the government will allocate people so that all those whose initials begin from A to M will go to doctor number 1, and the people whose initials are from N to Z will go to doctor number 2. Only a few days ago, in this very city, a woman tells me her doctor, whom I could name, told her, you know, you'll just be a number after the plan starts. And I won't be able to keep your secrets. I'll have to pass all the secrets you tell me on to the government. Now, this sort of propaganda, in my opinion, is an insult to the intelligence of the people of Saskatchewan.
Mr. Douglas finished with a warning. There has been one medical plan, a sort of pilot project in operation in the Swift Current Health District since 1946. Many of the people I've talked to say it's satisfactory. But 2 other health districts have rejected similar plans in plebiscites by more than 4 to 1. Mr. Douglas told his audience in Regina that when the Swift Current program was set up, the College of Physicians and Surgeons had threatened participating doctors with the loss of their licenses. He said he'd called in officials of the college and told them that if they wouldn't cooperate, he could and would summon the legislature within 7 days to pass one bill, and that would take away the college's power to license doctors and vest it instead in the University of Saskatchewan. The same warning, he made it very clear, was still in effect. As Mr. Douglas put it, what the legislature had given, the legislature could take away. His entire statement drew a complete denial yesterday from the president of the College of Physicians and Surgeons, Dr. A.J.M. Davies.
From the information gathered, I wish to state the college never suggested that the doctors in the Swift Current area have their licenses canceled if they worked under the plan. In fact, the registrar was sent to Swift Current to ask the doctors to work for a fee for service and not for a salary. Furthermore, the executive committee of those years state that they were not called into the Honorable T.C. Douglas's office and told that if they canceled licenses, the college's power to license doctors would be taken away. Because of this information, as president of the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Saskatchewan, I am sorry to state that I have to repudiate the statement of the Premier. I should also like to correct a false impression regarding our supposed opposition to the introduction of the hospital plan. The following is an excerpt from a letter of the college to Mr. Douglas, dated February 1946. The authors of the draft legislation for hospitalization are to be complimented on their approach to the problem of free hospitalization to all patients in this province.
And so the battle lines are drawn. As Mr. Douglas says, this is not only a provincial debate. It was Saskatchewan that first put in a government hospital plan in 1947. Now we all accept it as part of Canadian life. It was the voters of Saskatchewan who elected North America's first socialist government. Mr. Douglas prefers to call it a cooperative government. The immediate question is whether that government will survive. And in this confusing four-way contest, almost no one will make a firm prediction. If it does survive, we may be on the way to government medical insurance everywhere. Publicly, all four party leaders are confident. Mr. Douglas that the people will stay with the CCF. Mr. Thatcher that they'll rally behind his Liberals. Mr. Peterson that the Conservatives will become a major factor in Saskatchewan politics for the first time since 1934, and Mr. Kelm that social credit will take a long step in what his followers call their march on Ottawa. Everyone, politicians and reporters, have been taking their own small private polls, and you can get as many predictions from these unscientific samples as you like. It is evident that there's still a large undecided vote. Some pollers put it as high as 30%. The real secret is obviously locked in the minds and the hearts of the people of Saskatchewan, and they aren't telling till they go to the polls on Wednesday. Norman DePoe reporting. Good evening.